Lofi Poli Sci coming at you. Michael Pickering here with our good friend Gregory Day, a writer, director, bookseller, and the voice behind HipsvilleAD, the fanatical sective god of subcultures and fervent ramblings of all breed of cinematic pleasures. How we doing out there today, Gregory Day?
Oh yeah, I am spectacular, sir, as I should say, because it's the season. I am spooktacular.
Oh, spooky, spooky. You know, it's so crazy. I love Halloween. It's my second favorite holiday, but horror movies are not my jam, buddy. So why don't you tell us? Why don't you tell us what today's movie list is
Oh
all
yeah.
about?
Yeah, we're gonna be doing a horror list, but not just any horror list. We're gonna be doing a top 10 Splatter-Flix list. This is a list that goes out to all my gorehound friends out there who love the grimy, gross, gore-filled movies. So, fair warning, we are going to be talking about some pretty nasty visual effects in horror movies today.
Yeah, yeah. People, heads up out there. You know, we're not telling you to watch these gory flicks. We're just saying these are some gory flicks, all right? So actually, we may be doing you a favor to keep you away from some of this stuff, you know? Because I know me. Whoo.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm gonna wait to talk about some of this when we get into it. All right, all right. Well, then let's go
Yeah, you say
ahead
stay
and
away, but maybe it'll attract you to them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are people out there, and it is that season. But it's a question for you towards the end. We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
All right, what we got coming in at number 10, my friend?
Yeah, number 10 is Blood Feast from 1963, the OG gore film. This is a movie about a weirdo occultist who is murdering women to assemble a body to resurrect an Egyptian god to inhabit this body and come to the earth. We talked a little bit about this in conjunction with another movie called Blood Diner. This is the original gore film. This is like the first movie to come out that had explicit violence in it, really pushing the boundaries what Hollywood films could not do during the time of the ratings board. So this is a film made outside the Hollywood system, featuring a lot of by, by today's standards, really dated practical effects. But this is the film that showed, a woman getting her tongue cut out on camera, like showing the someone holding a bloody tongue. And so this is a real, um, transgressive movie for its time. A drive-in feature from one of the great American directors, Herschel Gordon Lewis. And this is a film that came out at in the year that Kennedy was assassinated. So it wasn't like wasn't intended to be a comment on violence in our society, but it definitely coincides with a shifting moment in our culture. And yeah, so this is one of the great grindhouse exploitation films ever made, and it's worth checking out because it's just got a wonderful color palette, and it's gore and all that's fantastic redness on camera. So yeah, this is a great slice of American history right here in this flick.
You know, whenever you say it like that, like a piece of American history and like that, you almost sell me on it, buddy. You almost sell me on it. But then when you start this trailer up, it literally starts off with a guy saying, if you have a heart condition or something like that, you might want to leave the theater for the next 90 seconds. And
Hmm.
I'm like, oh my goodness. I was like, this is just the first one. I was like, I have 9 more of these trailers to look at. I was like, dude, but but you are right for 1963. Okay. Like if you think about all the things that horror films do or have been doing, for the past 30 years, or especially the 1980s is normally when I think of like the heyday of horror, when it really starts to like hit big. And then even like a resurgence of like your Texas Chainsaw Massacres or your Saw or your Saw like 5, 6, 7, 8. There's like a million of them. Like you really start to get this resurgence of bloody, gory films, right? Um,
Hmm.
but that wasn't always there in film, right? Like it had to start somewhere. Like we've talked about film history before with like, The Wizard of Oz and like Casablanca or The Maltese Falcon or like the old westerns with John Wayne. You're literally going from that era of film to 1963 and Blood Feast. And that couldn't be like more different of cinema, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about another really great horror film from this year is which is a studio production, it's called The Haunting, which is a fantastic movie, but it's in black and white and it's about this haunted mansion, but it's all told through sound effects and camera angles and lighting and stuff. And so it relies on its atmosphere, whereas that's the norm of a horror film up to this point. Um, and then you get this film, which just comes in with an entirely different approach, and it's not coming in from from an artistic stance. It's coming in from a shock value point of view, to get people to come buy tickets to a movie like that. You want to see some really atrocious things happen on film. Come see this movie, and that was kind of the selling point of this film. But again, like, this is the same year that The Birds came out, and The Birds also truly, one of the great masterpieces of horror cinema. But it does also have a some moments of like true gory violence on screen. There's a scene where the guy seeing the corpse with his eyes pecked out in that movie. So yeah, this is like the time when horror films are evolving. They're not quite to the level of your Chainsaw Massacres, but this is like ground zero for where this stuff kind of takes off.
It's interesting, and it's interesting to think it started off like in the 1960s and in 63. But like talking about the evolution, I think your next pick really starts to see an evolution of a new genre or subgenre within this genre, right? What do you have at number 9?
Oh yes. Yeah, number 9 is Dawn of the Dead from 1978. It's the film that to a lot of us is the epitome of the splatter film, but it's still kind of early in the stages of this. So this is a film that came out in '78, and um, it's a zombie film about these survivors who hold up in a mall trying to survive, and it's a commentary on consumerism at the time, and Vietnam has happened, had recently ended, I should say, and so it's also a tumultuous decade, and so there's this film comes out, and it's takes everything that Blood Feast did and makes it like an art form. Like Dawn of the Dead comes in with some of the best practical effects for its time. And this features, heads getting severed, limbs getting severed, zombies eating, full on guts in this film. And so this is to me like where this whole like splatter period begins. And it's almost a decade after, or a decade more after Blood Feast came out, but yeah, this is where visual effects and the visual effects in this film were made by the great Tom Savini, really starts to take off as its own art form and its own reliable entertainment source.
And I think if not for this movie, or maybe other movies would have done it later eventually, but to me, this film, like I think I saw this movie when I was a kid, and it's probably the reason why I don't watch horror films today is because I watched this as a kid. But like if you think of all your Walking Dead TV shows and all the other offshoots of Walking Dead TV shows, like it all starts with this movie, right?
Well, I mean, it all starts with Night of the Living Dead, but this is the sequel to Night of the Living
Oh,
Dead.
right, right. That's
Night of the
absolutely
Living,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But Night of the Living Dead it's in black and white, and it does have its fair share of gore. Um, but this is the film I think that really launched our fascination as a culture with these types of movies.
Yeah, I mean, zombie movies, like every so often you think they've done all the zombie that they're ever going to do, and then they're on like Walking Dead season number 58, like
Yeah, I know.
they keep coming out with shows, and every so often a new
Mhm.
zombie movie comes out as well. I mean, they just it keeps coming back, and I'll tell you at the end of this trailer, the warning for this one, because so many of these trailers give warnings, but it says there is no explicit sex in this picture. However, there are scenes of violence which may be considered shocking. No one under 17 will be admitted. Like they are
Yes,
creating NC-17 rating before they called it NC-17. And
yes, yes.
in the 70s, you could put anything in a movie and like it could still be rated PG-13 or R rated, Like it's pretty incredible to think about. In 78, a zombie movie, they made it NC-17, but didn't call it NC-17.
Yeah, yeah. The rating hadn't existed yet, but I think Dawn of the Dead was either released with an X rating or it was released with no rating. So it was just kind of regulated that you couldn't be under 17 to come watch it. So I'm pretty sure it didn't have a rating at all because the censor board wouldn't even release it. Um, because of how violent it is.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, I would also say like this is the film I would that kind of like has sets the precedent for having these shocking visual effects throughout the entire movie. Whereas Blood Feast has one or two scenes, and a lot of Blood Feast you have to kind of get through scenes of cops talking, trying to figure out the murder, or like these um, filler scenes really to get from effect scene to
Sure,
effect
sure.
scene. But Dawn of the Dead is really where like the whole movie is just stacked from beginning to end with really great effects.
I will say one thing about like effects and I mean the trailer looking at it because you know I wasn't going to rewatch the movie for this list, but but watching the effects on it, you know, I was like, all right, some of them look kind of dated, but still like 50 years on, pretty good, like really pretty good.
Oh yes,
Um,
yeah.
and it made me think like because practical effects from 40, 50 years ago are dated, I can sometimes watch like those kind of horror movies because like they don't affect me as much, you know? But
Mhm.
your next one, my friend, no way. No way in hell. Go ahead and talk about your number 8, please.
Yeah, the next one is probably or one of the most difficult films on this list is a film called Martyrs from 2008. This is a really difficult movie to watch. So that if this is like one of the two movies on this list that I would, if you are really squeamish or you have a hard time watching incredibly extreme films, I would recommend not watching. But also, um, it's just this is a the film made at the height of the movement, the French extremity movement that we've talked about prior on this podcast.
Oh, the French.
Yes, yeah, but yeah, this is at the that's kind of happening, and we also have the torture porn stuff with Saw and other films like that coming out, and this is one of the toughest films of that period. It's about a woman who is trying to track down this family who had kidnapped her when she was a child, and she's after them to get her revenge. But once she does encounter the family, she finds out there's something really weird going on, and they're um, attached to some very strange people. Um, without giving away too much of the plot, because it is a film. If you're going to go into it, it's rewarding if you don't know where it's going to be going. But it has a tremendous amount of torture and violence in the film, body mutilations, skinnings. Um, and it's a film I think it's aimed at trying to evaluate the genre itself of the torture porn or fascination with torture during this time period. I mean, this is a film that came out, at the height of the Guantanamo Bay torturing stuff and the War on Terror. Um, and this is a film trying to mine why we're so fascinated by this stuff or morbidly fascinated by it, if you want to say that. And getting to some answer or some explanation for all of this. So I won't get into what that is in this film, but this is a incredibly tough film to watch, and I had to put it on here because it is the effects are so great, and but they do have a point to them. It's not just a salacious piece of cinema. And it's a film like if you watch the DVD, I don't know how it is on Blu-ray, but if you watch the DVD, it does come with an introduction from the director who immediately apologizes for the film you're about to watch.
Oh,
Which I
wow.
think yes,
Really?
yes, I think that says a lot about the content of the movie.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
Especially for the French to apologize for a film. Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't want to say too much about it because I haven't seen the movie, but the trailer, I was just like, goodness, goodness. I was like, I could kind of feel like what you were talking about it. But I think it's also important when thinking about this genre because this genre takes a lot of heat from society, from government, and like a lot of these films, when the producers make them, they know they're going to be blacklisted from a ton of different countries, right? You know, like a movie like
Hmm.
this, I doubt China censor board allowed Martyrs to be played in China, you know, and it's
Yeah.
probably like that in a
Hmm.
whole ton of countries. So horror specifically as a genre to me, I think it's fascinating that it would turn inward on itself to evaluate. It's like, look, okay, why are we doing this? Obviously, so many people have a problem with this genre, with this approach, like you said, with this fascination of with torture, like in Guantanamo Bay, and it's like a social commentary. So, like to me, I think, wow, I was like, how introspective to really turn a film in on itself from the genre. I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, yeah. I will say also think that horror films from Europe sometimes are incredibly violent and bloody, and I don't think we contextualize them correctly sometimes because we think about the modern lifestyle of Europeans, especially the French or the Italians, and we have this as Americans, we have this view of them as sort of relaxed, slow societies that don't care really much about military interventions and things. But if you look at the history of that continent and the history of some of these countries, they're incredibly violent and really bloody. And I
Oh
think a lot of
goodness,
that
yes.
stuff bleeds into their history of horror. And yeah, so I think sometimes when I think, especially for the French extremity period, people are like, "Oh, I can't believe this movie is French." But it's like if you think about where they're coming from and their country's history, like, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I have to go no further back than to think about the very explicit pictures of Mussolini's death in Italy and the death
Mhm.
and the pictures of his body after and the stories of what happened. And that's less than 100 years ago, you know?
Oh yeah.
But let's walk away from that one and let's walk into your number seven. What do you got for us?
Yeah, number seven, we're also taking a little step away from horror because we're going to Hong Kong and we're talking about
Yes,
one of
yes.
the craziest uh gore films ever made. This is not a horror movie, but it's got gore effects that rival the best of them, and it's called The Story of Ricky or Ricky O. It came out in 1991. It's like a live action manga about this guy named Ricky who is in prison, and he's like a Superman. He takes all kind of damage to his body in the fights in this film, but he is up against battling the warden and his top guards, and they all have their own special abilities and powers. But their fights in this film, which is like a sort of a kung fu film, but not to any great degree. But the fights in this film involve like tearing people's arms off and strangling people with intestines and skinning people and just Ricky takes all kinds of damage to his his eyes get gouged out and he gets his tendons cut and he kind of puts himself back together. Almost like Wolverine from the X-Men. And so this is a blast of a movie that has just incredibly violent scenes in the film, but they're satisfying and they're not played for laughs, but they are in a cartoonish manner. And then, so I think just watching a film where someone gets their, in a fist fight and gets their head, punched off, brings some kind of, uh, entertainment value to it.
It's this movie really made me think of Kung Fu Flick meets Toxic Avenger B movie kind of style. Is that like where you
Mm-hmm.
would put it? Like
That is
kind of
exactly how I would describe it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. For those listening out there who are not sure what Toxic Avenger is, well, that's like I don't know how to explain it other than to say Toxic Avenger. Like it's
Yeah. It's an
1980s.
action. Yeah.
Would that be right?
Yeah. I would say,
1980s?
yeah. 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 And Toxic Avenger was made in 83, 84, something like that. But I would say both these movies have very similar qualities where they are cartoonish action movies, but they are also incredibly gross. But they're both kind of satires in their own way. Like I think Riccio is satirizing prison movies or like the way this, almost like fear of the state. I mean, it does take place in a world where prisons are privatized, 100% privatized. And so
Oh wow.
once you're in prison, your life is kind of sold away. There's not a lot of chance you're going to get out because the people who are running them are profiting off of you. And so there is that sort of social commentary in this film. And then, of course, Toxic Avenger, similarly, is a film about consumerism and the government waste and all that kind of stuff. So there are these like over the top action movies that are kind of using violence and gross out effects to kind of talk about you know societal problems.
And the discussion about privatized prisons is still going on today. Like that's hot topic in the US even.
Oh yeah.
Should federal prisons be privatized or not? So to think about 31 years ago out in Hong Kong, and that's pretty cool. That's a big topic. I also wanted to ask, is this movie really considered part of like the Hong Kong New Wave with like Hard Boil or anything like that, or is this separate from?
I mean, not really. I would say that it's congruent to that, where it's just
Okay,
during this
gotcha.
highly inventive time coming out of Hong Kong, where they're just making all kinds of films. And the director of this film's also made, sorry, I don't know his name off the top of my head, but he's also made other great films like The Seventh Curse, and Erotic Ghost Story, which just makes these really, you know, absolutely bananas kind of horror films.
Gotcha. I was curious about that whenever I saw it on the list and watched. I was like, I need to ask. Need to ask. All right, what you got coming in for us with number 6?
Yeah, we're sort of back into horror, and we're going to Italy this time. We're talking about a film called City of the Living Dead from 1980. It's also known as The Gates of Hell, and I think that's a more appropriate title. But if you are out there looking for, you may look for it under The City of the Living Dead here in America. This is by the gore master from Italy, Lucio Fulci. His horror films are super notorious for real gross out moments. But I really like this film because it's got a lot of atmosphere, and it's about a small town, and this priest hangs himself to open a portal to hell, and you don't quite. It's a little ambiguous, so you don't quite know, is this priest possessed by some other force that forced him to do this, but him sacrificing himself has kind of opened this gate to hell, and the protagonists are trying to seal it up, and so it kind of unleashes um, this terror in this town where there's zombies coming back zombies coming back from the dead, but also like people are kind of going crazy and killing each other, and it's just a lot of mayhem in this film. But it's notorious for a couple practical effects scenes, specifically a woman who's entranced by the spirit of this priest, and she uh, barfs up all of her organs on camera. And so these are the kind of
Gross.
films that, like, yeah, it's super gross, but like this is the kind of films that like mid '80s Italian films, or early '80s Italian films were just going all out, because these kinds of extreme depictions of violence on screen were bankable things. And so Fulci was the best to do that kind of stuff. Gouging eyes, ripping limbs off, that kind of stuff. And like we were just mentioning, this, the image of this priest kind of hanging there does evoke, a
Mussolini.
leader being hung. Yeah, Mussolini kind of goes all the way back to that,
Wow.
and it does kind of. I mean, it doesn't expressly go back to that, but I think you can put the two together, like looking at that image in this film and looking at that image you just brought up, and
Yeah,
make the
that's just
connection pretty easily.
35 years
Yeah.
apart.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of violence in these films. Um, I think getting to the point of like there's this history within this place, right? And so like the atmosphere of this place is like unlocking, um, dormant evil in this place. And so the Italians were some of the best at do gore films, but this is, for me, this is like the best one.
I gotta say, and I kind of still want to save it until later when we get to the Q&A section. But
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you even mentioned it, you're like, these movies were coming out because it was these effects were coming out because it was a bankable thing. That's what a lot of people need to realize, that industry. I mean, industry is made up with artists, right? And artists want to make their films, but these films only get produced if there is a market, if there is a revenue stream.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the only way you hear about it. Like there artists and directors and filmmakers who make films that are completely off the grid. Yeah, there sure are, but like we probably don't hear about them because there's no market for them. But like if you hear about a film like this one, City of the Living Dead, we're hearing about it because there was enough of a market, enough people who bought tickets, who bought a VHS of it, who bought a DVD of it, like who kept it alive throughout society, throughout the world for 42 years now. So like these kinds of movies are being made because people are watching them. And like you said, I kind of want to talk about that towards the end. But I will say one thing about this trailer. There is nothing more terrifying to me in the world than the idea of being buried alive. And when this trailer starts with a woman in a coffin buried alive, I was like, oh, nope, nope, nope. I was like, not doing it, not doing it. I was like, zombies are one thing, my friend, but like being buried alive, I was like, no way, this should be
Yes.
crazy. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
oh man, because that invokes a different kind of fear, right? A different kind of
Mm-hmm.
suspense in a horror film that it doesn't take gore to
Yeah.
get. And
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the idea of being suffocated and claustrophobic and with no light, and it's just like, to me that's like a differentiation between like gore horror versus like suspense horror. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is the person going to get out? Like that's to me that like, uh, anyway, okay, well, let's keep going. All right, number 5, what do you got for us?
Yeah, number 5, we were talking about Reanimator from 1985. This is probably the least gory film on this list, but it is still pretty freaking bloody. This is one of the finest horror comedies ever made, and it's about Dr. Herbert West, who's come up with this serum that will resurrect the dead. Only when he tries it out on humans, it brings people back as flesh-hungry zombies. And so he and his pals in the film are trying to figure out how to make the serum resurrect people as they should be when they come back to life. Only that goes completely, you know, beyond their control, and the whole it's kind of set in one hospital, but it kind of like creates a zombie outbreak, and it makes a monster out of the antagonist, and things just get really out of hand, and things get really really bloody. And so this movie features a ton of laughs, and it's almost like another Toxic Avenger kind of satire, where it's um, it's a black comedy with a lot of bodily mutilations that are played for laughs, and a lot of scenarios that are played for slapstick laughs. But yeah, this features like a bone saw going through the body, and like a reanimated head that gets carted around a lot, and so it's got a lot of incredibly great practical effects. But I wanted to include this because even though it's not as extreme as some of the films in this list, it's a hell of a good time.
Yeah, I know of this one. This was a film that my brother was starting to let me watch, and then my parents walked in on, and they were like, "Oh no, 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 no." And I'm kind of thankful they did that. My brother was a horrible influence. What a horrible person, Yes, if you're
Yeah.
wondering, do I like my brother? Well, there you go. Go. Um,
Well, I would
no,
say that's
but
a very admirable thing to show your little brother Reanimator, but that's just me.
yeah, okay, sure, we'll go with that. There were definitely some, like you said on the trailer, it showed the picture of the guy's head on the cart talking, and I got the feel that it was kind of like a spoof horror film, which of course for me is like it's more appetizing than just like a straight horror film, just try to put some funny stuff in it. So, I could appreciate
Hmm.
that more. Kind of like also you said, oh, the Blood Diner, was that the early one?
Oh, yes. Hmm.
Yeah, that one also I kind of remembered whenever you brought it up. I was like, yeah, that one kind of was funny too.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and
I
I
could
think
dig it.
humor helps, cut the tension of a film of a scene, whether it's is scary or whether it's gory or whatever. It helps cut that tension for the audience.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's hard to do as a filmmaker as
Yes,
well,
yes.
right? Like how do you achieve that? And also like how does it affect your overall feel of the film, right? Because like in this genre, you are definitely trying to make your audience feel a certain way. So like
Hmm.
how do you cut that tension but at the same time still preserve the overall feeling that you're trying to create for the viewer? Yeah, I think there's a lot of um technical tools, no technical like I just think it's hard to do, okay? That's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I would say like it depends on what kind of film you want to make, but I think if you're aiming to make a horror film that is funny, not a funny film that is or a comedy that is has elements of horror, you got to have like a 70-30 balance. So it's like 70% horror and 30% um comedies, because you're presenting a realistic situation. Like this is the reality of the film, and its situation is funny at times. There are really, consequences to what's happening. The zombies are really going to eat you. The killer is really going to kill the characters in the film, not the other way around, where everything is kind of played for laughs, like a scary movie. Um, so I think having that 30% comedy in a film like this, it helps alleviate the tension in the film. It helps, the kills kind of go down easier. That kind of feeling.
Oh, I get what you're saying, right? The percentage discussion, it kind of makes sense. A film that doesn't necessarily get easier to digest, no matter what percentages you use, would be this next one that you have. Number four, what do
Yeah,
you have?
yep. Yeah, this is Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. So this whole list is kind of built as a sister list to the first list we did this year. Back in
Yes.
January, we did the extreme films list, but that wasn't just tied to horror films. And so this one, just for the most part, is all horror films. And so Cannibal Holocaust is on both of these lists. I consider this film, if you are a true gore hound, if you're really into watching these movies, this is like the rite of passage movie that you have to see. Um, and it was a film like for many years when I was in the video store, I'd walk by and I just see that cover and I was just like, oh Lord, I know I have to like really prepare myself to watch this film just by the images on the VHS or DVD box cover. But it was the kind of film that, if you really wanted a reputation as someone who could stomach horror films, this is the film you had to watch. And it's like one of the first found footage movies, and it's about um, this reputable documentary crew who goes to South America to make a documentary about this cannibal tribe, and they really um, push the tribe too far in trying to get reactions out of them, and then things don't go so well for them. But it's a film that was like kind of made to make it look like a documentary, and then it was kind of sold as a fake document, or sold as a documentary where people were butchered on screen. And the effects in this film are so good that the director and the crew were arrested, and had to prove in court that all the effects were fake, and they had to prove how they did them, and kind of like hand over all of the diagrams and things like that to show that they were all fake. Um, but it's just a really nasty movie. It has no redeeming qualities, honestly. Um, but it's just like a film. It's almost like an endurance test. Like how much of this film can you take? And you're watching a lot of like genital mutilations and complete body dismemberments on screen. Um, and yeah, it's just a notorious movie. And I will warn you, if you do go out and seek this movie out, it does feature real footage of animals getting killed on screen. So that's all. That's, to me now, having watched the movie a number of times, that's the hardest part to watch. Um, and so yeah, this is like one of those really notorious films that if you're going to go down this path of being a fan of this kind of genre, is one of those tough ones. Unlike Martyrs, which has a point to it, the whole point of this film, I guess, is that, you're just watching cruelty on screen.
Yeah, that's a bit much to take in. And like this is the second time I've watched this trailer, right? Because I like the second I saw it
Yes,
queue up,
yes.
I was like, I knew exactly what this was. And I
Yeah.
remember our previous conversation, so I'm not gonna like tread the same ground, but I will say
Mm-hmm.
like, even watching this a second time and thinking about it, um, I mean, what, 9 months later, almost really,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and thinking about a film of this sort and thinking about like how you said the filmmaker and the people who were involved were arrested and they had to prove in court that this was all fake, right? And to me, it's
Yeah.
like, wow. I'm like, then the question to me comes out, why make this? Um, which I don't want to address yet. Like I said, I want to wait until the Q&A
Mm-hmm.
section.
Sure.
But I mean, it's real. It's a real thing that it pops up.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, and I
Yeah.
also kind of feel that same way a little bit, but for a different reason about your next one as well.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, this next one I think is a truly great work of art. It's The
That is
Fly from
debatable.
1986. It's The Fly from 1986. It's David Cronenberg's remake of the 50s Fly. The original Fly from the 50s, the Vincent Price movie, was about a scientist who's, I believe, in the experiment that he was working on, transports his head and his hands with the flies. So there's a tiny little fly with a human head out there, and then there's a human body with a fly head and a fly hand. But this film is about a scientist who's working on a teleportation device that it transports you from one pod to another, but it disassembles your molecules and it reassembles the molecules in the second pod. But in the first pod, when he does the first successful test, there's a fly in the pod as well. So when it reassembles him, the computer doesn't know what to do, so it puts together this new being of the human DNA and the fly DNA together. And so the duration of this movie is watching Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, turn from a man into a fly. And it's a really disgusting movie, but it's almost like a very heartfelt film of watching someone die from a disease in this film, watching his body deteriorate and watching his bodily functions deteriorate in very gory detail. I don't know how to say it any
Oh,
other
that's
way, but
right.
like
Yeah,
you're
that's the
watching,
right
yeah,
way.
yeah. But yeah, it's just like a great tragedy of watching someone die. People have said that it's a metaphor for AIDS from when it came out, and yeah, I mean, you're watching someone turn into a fly. I mean, I don't. It's but in like some of the best practical effects you're ever going to see on screen. And David Cronenberg is a filmmaker I admire a lot, and with these kinds of films, I think that he he's one of the filmmakers who never shies away from showing you something. So if he has an idea and he's going to show you what's going on, he doesn't skimp around it. He's not going to do something off camera. He's not going to tell you, have people talking about, oh, this thing I saw. No, he's going to fucking show you right on camera, this guy turning into a fly. So I have a lot of admiration for him because he's also a great storyteller. And the reason this film is really good is because it's a tragedy of this guy who, the folly of him creating this thing has led to this part of, the consequences of it. And so by the end of the film, even though you watch this incredibly gross movie for 2 hours, it's got a really sad ending. And I think that's why it stands a test of time.
I would say I agree with you on so much of what you said. I think why this movie is so effective is because the effects are practical and they're gross. Like this is a gross film. Like I've seen
Yeah.
it a long time
Yeah.
ago. I won't watch it again because it so grosses me out. But like
Yeah.
you do by the end of the film feel for Jeff Goldblum because he doesn't want this to happen. Like,
Yeah.
and because it is so gross and for me, like I watched it, I'm like, I felt bad for him. And that was, you said Cronenberg, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was Cronenberg's like objective is to use these effects to make you feel for the character. And it worked. But still, I was still grossed out to hell. Like I was like, I never again, never again. Um, but I agree with you completely that I think you're right that Cronenberg is a master of his craft and telling the story and using the effects to complement each other. I think
Mm-hmm.
he achieved that. And
Yeah.
I think in gore, when you do that and it serves the story, that's one thing. And I think The Fly, you're right. I think
Mm-hmm.
The Fly is probably one of the best examples of doing that. And I think that's probably why you have it at number three. But
Yeah.
to your,
Well, kind of go back to
oh, go
or
ahead.
if I can, real quick, just go back to another list where you talked about the gangster film. You brought up Eastern Promises, and I
Yeah,
rewatched it since then. And, I think just even though that movie's not a gore film, I think we could talk about just why practical effects are so good, um, and making you feel the gravity of injury and distress to the body. And Cronenberg is so good at that because in that film there's that knife fight, and there's a scene of someone disposing of a body and cutting the fingers off, and just like showing you the gory detail of this, what it
right.
does to you, what's his lifestyle like. Yeah, I think he's just a master at depicting body horror and how we treat our bodies in many different ways, no matter what kind of story he's telling. So yeah, this is just yeah, I think he's just one of the great artists of our time.
I didn't realize Cronenberg did Eastern Promises. Um,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's a great film. And I would say to add on to you, with specifically in that movie, so he uses all the effects to make you feel like these individuals in organized crime, they do horrible, gruesome things, and you're just like these are despicable people, and the effects they hit you so hard, and then towards the end, one of them is literally about to push a baby into the water to kill it, and one of them says, "Yo, we don't kill babies," and like they end up not killing the baby, but for a second you're like, "Oh my god, they're really about to do
Yeah,
this." Like
because it's that kind of movie.
right, and you're
Yeah.
just like, "Oh my goodness." And that's storytelling, that's effect use. I mean, that's filmmaking. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, an amazing director for sure. All right, well, take us to your number two before we get sidetracked on another list.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we're talking about number two is The Thing from 1982, the great John Carpenter movie. Probably, at least in my opinion, the greatest creature feature ever made. Um, and I can't recall if we've talked about this film on this podcast before.
We have.
Um, but
Yes, we have.
okay, yeah. Yeah, but it's it's the story of an alien that's infiltrated this research crew out in Antarctica, and it perfectly replicates any life form that it wants. And so it's this paranoid tale of these guys trapped inside trying to figure out which one of them is the imitation. And so it's a great paranoid thriller. At times it's good psychological thriller, but it is one of the few films that manages to use those filmmaking techniques with the just insanely great practical effects. Because once the alien reveals itself, it's got these just out of this world anatomy, and it can kind of change into all kinds of things. And the movie does not skimp on any of that. And so we get crawling heads, we get tentacles coming out of dogs, we get all kind of weird, strange, organic shapes, and gallons of blood. And so this is one of the all-time famous 80s films, one of the all-time famous practical effects films. So this is one not to be missed.
I remember this as being one of the most boring aliens films ever. Like I always remember this film way different than anyone else.
Really?
And let me tell listeners out here, like I agree with Gregory Day. This is one of the highest regarded horror films of all time. Like on any critic's list, like The Thing is way, way high regarded as a film. And is it John Carpenter? Is that who did this one?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like well-known filmmaker, well known for this one. Like so many films get inspiration from what was done with The Thing in 1982. But all I can remember is no alien throughout most of the movie. And I was like, where's the alien? But like I look back now and I think Gregory Day, I may have deliberately deleted some of this movie
I think
just to
you have.
not, yeah, just to not remember because I don't like horror movies. So like
Yeah.
so I'm not gonna go back and rewatch it. I'm just gonna say
Uh-huh.
I don't remember it all that well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
But
would say it's probably got a slow burn of the first 30 to 30 minutes. Yeah, probably no more than 30 minutes. If the movie's not that long, before it gets into the practical effects. And then from there, it's kind of sustained where you're just deep in the practical effects for the next hour or so.
yeah, you're right. And like I said, this film is really well known to me. Even though it's been a long time since I've seen it, and maybe one
Mhm.
Halloween I'll go back and watch it. Maybe, maybe. We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see. All right, we'll take us in for your number one on the list.
Yeah, number one, I gotta put it on here because I do think it's honestly the greatest practical effects film ever made, and one of the most in the greatest gross out film ever, is Day of the Dead from 1985. We already had one George Romero movie on this list, Dawn of the Dead, uh, but and that movie really kicked off this whole trend of um, gory practical effect films. But Day of the Dead, his film from a decade later. Is his masterpiece, and it's his masterpiece of gore. Tom Savini, famous effects individual, did the effects on here, and these are as about as convincing as you could probably possibly ever find. Um, Violence to the human body. Like, I've never seen a real body like eaten by zombies, but this film looks about as realistic as I could possibly ever imagine. It is set in um, the future, for where Dawn of the Dead is still set. Feels like it's set in the 70s, but this film is set in an underground bunker with these scientists who are trying to figure out a way out of the zombie problem, and the tensions are running high between them and their military guards because there's kind of a lack of authority with our government, and so they're trying to figure out who is really in charge down there. And so um, that's kind of the sort of psychological horror of the film, where these two groups vying for the power of the station. But the zombie effects in this film are amazing. You have all kinds of spilling guts and people getting eaten and dismembered in this film, and it just looks so incredible on film that it is rather disgusting to watch. I will admit. But yeah, but they're the best. So I had to put them at number one. And this is a really great film. This is a film that is really, George Romero didn't just make horror films to make horror films to attract people with the violence on screen. I mean, he made Night of the Living Dead right at the height of the civil rights movement in the Vietnam War. We have Dawn of the Dead talking about consumerism, and this film is talking about the military industrial compound. And so the violence is very warranted on screen to show the effects of all that stuff. So yeah, I had to put this at number one because the effects are so good, but they beat up the thing just by a little bit for me. And yeah, this is a masterpiece of horror.
That's interesting. I'm pretty sure I've seen this one. In fact, I think I've seen all of Ramirez's dead movies, as I'm going to call them,
Mm-hmm.
the movies of the
Mm-hmm.
dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they're legendary in horror. They're legendary in zombie as a subgenre. I mean, there's just anyone who does anything even remotely zombie related pays homage to these movies. And the evolution of being able to use these effects to to actually do effective creative storytelling that draws in an audience, I think is is an achievement in and of itself, because it's one thing just making a movie to be gory just to see if you can do it, and to see how it affects people, or to see how the effects look on film, but then taking it to be able to use as a tool in telling a story, that's something completely different. And I think Romero and all of the Dead movies, I think that's definitely where it really takes off. But that's our list. That's Gregory Day's top 10 horror slash gory slash Halloween slash spooky slash whatever he wants to call it list. All right, but
Yeah,
we got some.
Splatter-Flix.
There we go. Splatter flicks. All right. So questions for you, my friend. First one. Why'd you
Yeah.
pick this
Mhm.
list?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of these kinds of movies, but HipsvilleAD, my blog, really caters to the gore hounds and genre film fans out there. And so I wanted to kind of talk about um, horror films for the month, but I wanted to get to something specific. So I really wanted to talk about movies that we don't see a lot in mainstream movies anymore, or a type of film that we don't see made in mainstream cinema anymore. I think a lot of our studio-backed movies are kind of um, moving away from doing all-out gore films. These are more independent flicks, but yeah, I wanted to show movies that I actually love that have a quality to them and go right in line with the dirty, gringy kind of films that I love to talk about on my blog.
Perfect, perfect. And that brings us into our second question. That because you have a blog about it, Hipsville AD. You love these movies in the art form. Yourself being a filmmaker, you know, 10 films is so few. Did you have any
Oh yeah.
runners up
Mhm.
that you were like so close to including?
Yeah, I had quite a few. I was trying to think about how to exclude some of them. So I have a few to talk about. So I won't get too deep into them, but I'll just list them off. I have a couple non-horror films. So Lady Snowblood, which is a flick we talked about on here, and
Mm-hmm.
then another Japanese film called Shogun Assassin, which is exploitation version of two Lone Wolf and Cub movies cut together. So it takes all the great parts of those two films and puts them into one movie. And so these are really great, graphically violent samurai exploitation movies, or like offshoots of those films. Heavily influenced Kill Bill in many ways, as far as like limbs getting cut off and stuff with samurai swords, and just that brand of shooting blood, like that geyser of blood coming out of people that you see in Kill Bill and other films like that. That's where this comes from. But horror wise, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from 1986, and then of course Scanners, another David Cronenberg, which probably has the greatest gore scene of all time in it, with the guy getting his head blown up in the first 20 minutes of the movie.
Interesting choices. We have talked about Lady Snowblood before, and I remember
Yeah.
that trailer distinctly, and most certainly you can see where Kill Bill Volume 1 pulls from it. For sure, for sure. All right, well, now let's get into like a real meat and potatoes question. What is it about horror and Halloween that so many people like these movies? And this really is the question
Mhm.
we've been putting off the entire episode, right? This is what we're coming into.
Yeah.
What
Mhm.
is it about this genre that people are into? Why does it still exist? What do you think?
Yeah, I think horror in general is just people want they just crave that thrill. They crave that excitement. They crave that thrill ride that you get from a lot of other things. Whether it's driving your car very fast or going on a roller coaster, but this is you're sitting in a cinema and you're fully immersed in this world that these filmmakers have made, and you're just on the edge of your seat, as someone's opening the door and there's a killer behind her, or someone's about to, um, trying to escape something. It puts you in that situation without having to actually experience that situation. And I think that feeling that evokes inside you is really thrilling for a lot of people. And so I think that's what attracts people to horror films in general. But I think with gore films, it's kind of this catharsis that they bring for audiences, or bring to an audience, because violence is such a huge part of our our planet, even though it's such an unnecessary thing, but it continues to um, happen across the planet. And it's one thing to experience it on screen, um, in imaginative ways versus experiencing it in real life. And so I think this also helps in some way kind of either relieve the fear of that or the urges of that in some sense. But yeah, I think being able to see that stuff on screen um, helps also like kind of gets you out of your own existence. Um, and to many different degrees of horror or violence on the screen. It could be sickening or it could be funny. It could be over the top. It could be depending on the situation. And I think that lots of people can find it whether it's entertaining or funny or whatnot. But I think it helps kind of shake you out of your normal, malaise of the day. And is satisfying in some kind of strange human way.
No, I hear you with all of that, and I think I agree with a good portion of it. I think I want to add to it by saying that
Hmm.
I think that, like you said, violence is such a real, it's of course avoidable, but it's such a real part of planet Earth's lives that we make it a part of our life. Um, However, a lot of times we kind of put our head in the sand, kind of like an ostrich, and pretend like it's not there.
Yes.
Or, even if it's in our own communities, you know, uh, which I'll talk about more in a second. But the idea that like you can live in a community and everything can be perfectly fine, but then somehow you have a direct effect on some horrible things going on around the world, but you never take the time to look at the horrible things that you're doing, i.e., the United States doing horrible things around the world and the cost of lives that it takes on people.
Hmm.
You never think about what that really looks like, right?
Yeah.
Like you never think about what does it look like to overthrow a country? What does it look like to have all the soldiers that are killed, have all the elderly people that are killed, all the women, all the children? Like you don't get that on the news, right? Like people don't
Right.
show the dead bodies and the horrible things of war that take place around the world. And so we can just kind of separate ourselves from basically all these real world foreign policy actions that we do as human beings to each other. But as long as we don't have to in person see it, we're okay with it, right? Like, oh, some people die. That's how it has to be. Like, really, really? If that's how it has to be, then why do so many people have a problem watching it on screen?
Right.
If
Hmm.
and I think that's one of the real calls to like myself, you know me, I've said it a million times. I'm a scaredy cat. I don't like horror films and stuff like this. Like, you know, but it doesn't mean I can't appreciate the fact that it really is calling a social commentary out on the choices we make as human beings. We have a problem watching
Yeah.
this stuff on screen, but we don't have a problem with doing it to each other in real life. That's an issue,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and I will say, like, for the flip
Yeah.
side, for me, like, so I live in a city like New Orleans. New Orleans has a lot of gun violence. It has a lot of crime. So, like, for me,
Hmm.
when I watch a movie, I don't like to watch a movie that makes me scared. Like horror movies, I don't like it because, like, I live in a place where I already have apprehension from just like being out and about. If it's late at night and it's a dark alley, that kind of situation. But
Hmm.
like, that's real life, and real life
Yeah.
happens sometimes.
Yeah.
So like I swing a different direction. I like to watch stuff about like, I don't know, like mm, fun stuff. Like I love cartoons, for instance. All right. I'm not going into it what
Sure.
I like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like I go a different route
Yeah.
with my fantasy
Uh,
and my movies. But
mhm.
like I said,
Yeah.
no less do I think that this genre is important because I think it is important for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, since this list is specifically all about violence on screen, but I will say just I think horror in general, whether it's disease or aging or death in general, horror also kind of looks at all of those things as well, like our fascination with death, or our curiosity with death, because no one knows what is beyond that. But we're the only living things on this planet that also know that we're going to die, and so we're the only ones who can then try to make sense of it or try to understand it or try to explore, you know, anything, all the different things that surround it. Um, but also like to get to death, like, you have to die. And so a lot of these films depict that as well, whether it's in any different form that I just mentioned. And so I think that's another thing that makes horror so um, sustainable as a genre.
Yeah, dealing with the macabre,
Yeah,
like really looking in on ourselves and saying, what does it look like when we get to the end of days? Um, and I don't mean that in like a biblical apocalyptic way. I meant it like,
sure.
like,
Personally, yeah,
yeah, what does
hmm
it look like when we get to that point or when our loved ones get to that point? It's not something we try to think about as a society, but like we're all going to get there sooner or later. Uh,
yeah,
and I think it is important to look at that as well. And to that end, let me more specifically even ask you, why is this list specifically important to you? And why should other people view this list as important?
yeah. So I think uh, I have a big problem with current movies. Especially studio movies. And so our films that are getting released, especially here in the States, are getting more and more homogenous. And they're not really, they're moving further and further away from depicting our lives and our reality. Um, and so, like, if you're watching a modern film, a studio film, let me make sure I'm clear about that. Violence rarely is depicted showing its true consequences. You rarely get to see sex or someone drinking or smoking on screen. So we're moving further and further away from really understanding. If you're viewing the world through these films, you're moving further and further away from depicting reality. Um, and I think it's important to watch films that do show the consequences of violence, whether it is funny or not. This is what really happens if you were to cut someone open. This is what really happens um, if someone were to lose a limb or something like that. It shows the consequences of violence. And so as we move further and further away from mainstream films showing that stuff, I think it's important to kind of go back and see films that do show that. Um, but these films are not just a bunch of fun films that are gory. Um, they're also reflective of the times they were made, and so I don't think a lot of films that come out today are really reflective of what's going on today. And so, if you look at these films, they were made during the period of the Kennedy assassination, or the Vietnam War, or the Reagan administration, the AIDS crisis, or the War on Terror. And so, a lot of these films were not necessarily addressing head on political problems or social logical problems, but were reflecting the feeling of the time. And to me, that's much more powerful because that then a film has a lasting problem or a lasting impact. And so, um, I really wanted to spotlight these films because I think these films can still be relevant today. We just lived through a pandemic, and so a lot of films about disease and um, greed and all this, sort of things we witnessed during this time period are reflected in older, hypothetical zombie films or other horror films, and so we're not really getting a lot of those same explorations of problems in our society uh, in our films today. And so I wanted to show, a good list of those types of films here on for Halloween.
I dig it. I dig it a lot. And you're absolutely right because, the films today that are making the hundreds of millions and the billions of dollars, they're superheroes with wings and stuff like that. And it's like,
Mm, yeah,
yeah, I mean, granted, like I like make believe stuff too, but no, I,
for
I
sure. Yeah,
appreciate I appreciate what you said, and it's right. Good deal, good deal. And for
yeah,
Halloween, why not? It's Halloween, people. My
yeah, yeah.
second favorite
Well,
holiday.
right, right. Yeah, and I just want to say, like, I'm not trying to say that those kinds of escapist films don't have a place, but like, there should be more than just that.
Oh, I agree completely.
Yeah,
Yes, there should
yeah,
be an array offered without a doubt.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But my good friend Gregory Day, before you take off for the day, what you got going on at HipsvilleAD? You talked about your blog earlier. What you writing about these days?
Yeah, yeah. Head on over there to badday.substack.com and check out my new series called Complimentary Creeps. It's my annual October theme where I talk about horror double features. And you can hit me up on Instagram at HipsvilleAD, or you can email me at HipsvilleAD@gmail.com if you want to talk movies.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So for the Halloween holidays, I always like to get into a little like I'll look into the creepy stuff, but I'd just be like, all right, that's enough. That's enough. 1 month. No more, no more. Well, as always, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on. We'll talk again sometime soon.
Yes, sir.
And that's HipsvilleAD's top 10 list. Check out our friend Gregory Day online. Follow him everywhere, people. And always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Talk to you soon, Lofi listeners. Pickering and Day, signing off.
Stay scared, y'all.